Stoneware pots. They may not sound very interesting, but when you think of pots that are early American art forms, pots that are among the most collectible in America, pots that are highly, highly valuable and connect us with magic rituals of the 19th century Congo, or connect us to the theft of industrial secrets from China in the 18th century, then perhaps you have pots with an interesting story behind them. My name is Mark Newell. I'm an archaeologist, and for the past 30 years I've researched, collected and excavated potteries in the southeastern United States. Over the next few programs I'd like to tell you something about the potteries of the old Edgefield district of South Carolina. In each program I will introduce you to the various types of vessels and styles of pots made in each of these major potteries in the old Edgefield district from approximately 1800 to 1910. We'll take a look at the forms, we'll take a look at the glazes, we'll take a look at the various potters' marks, and also some of the specialized marks that some of the potters themselves would put on these pots. The program will give you an overview of all of the Edgefield potteries and tell you something about the men and the women and their stories that are part of the rich and fascinating tradition of Edgefield pottery. The first pottery was created at a place called Pottersville, just outside Edgefield, South Carolina. At this point of time, that was the frontier. There was an urgent need for storage vessels for whiskey, turpentine, syrup, vessels that would be used to preserve meats. Bear meat was not uncommon. The first pottery was created by a man called Abner Landrum at Pottersville, just north of the city of Edgefield. And when that site was fully excavated recently, it was discovered that Landrum had built a 100-foot long Chinese dragon kiln. Prior to the excavation of the kiln at Pottersville, sometimes called Landrumsville, everybody seemed to want to believe that the glazes on Edgefield stoneware were locally invented. They're very rich wood ash glazes, which come in colors of brilliant greens, deep browns, mossy greens, lime green, depending on what other kind of woods are mixed with the ash. The Chinese kiln at Landrumsville tells us that Abner Landrum quite clearly had a source of information directly from China. That source was the result of basically industrial espionage. A Jesuit priest by the name of Father D'Entrecol went to the porcelain producing area in China and spoke to Christian converts there and potters, and then wrote a very highly detailed letter that he sent back to Paris explaining the whole process of porcelain. This was great information because European potters were just extremely interested in learning the secrets of Chinese porcelain manufacture. They hadn't been able to produce it, and Landrum himself was trying to produce it when he built this kiln. That letter, written in 1722, was translated and appeared in an English trade directory in 1755. And I believe this is almost certainly the information that came to Landrum. And he then began to build this kiln in the hopes of producing porcelain, but in fact started to produce a great deal of utilitarian stoneware. Many of the vessels that were produced at Pottersville were fairly crude. In fact, many of them seem to have been made by beginning potters. In fact, one beginning potter there was an enslaved African by the name of Dave. Dave worked for Landrum at his newspaper in Edgefield called The Hive, and that is almost certainly where he learned to read and write. And of course this was an activity that in those days was illegal for enslaved Africans, or African Americans as Dave was. But nevertheless, Dave clearly began to make pottery at the Landronsville, Pottersville pottery, and we can see some of those early vessels, and they do appear to be fairly crude as he was learning his craft. Most of these pots were of a clear glaze over a grey stoneware body, although as you'll see many other colours were produced during the production period up until about 1830. And Dave became remarkable because he would write his name, dates, and even small couplets on his vessels, and we will devote a program to Dave later in this series, and you'll see much of that fascinating work then. That is a brief overview of the beginning of the Edgefield stoneware tradition in the old Edgefield district. In the next program we'll talk about Lewis Miles and a little bit more about Dave, and about the Lewis Miles potteries and the loss of two of his pottery sites, one to pot hunters and the other as a result of bad archaeological judgment. But we'll cover that program, and then you will also be able to see a complete transcript of this program along with photographs on the archaeologyhour.com, where you'll be able to follow the program in print form. Hopefully you'll review that, hopefully you'll be back and see the rest of the program.